Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today was level design in horror, and specifically I wanted to compare Resident Evil Remake against System Shock 2. Now, the reason I find these two games quite interesting is because of the type of level design that's employed in these games. For example, in Resident Evil Remake, you are essentially given a kind of circular level design. You'll kind of go round the level in a kind of sort of circular fashion, whereas in System Shock 2 the whole game is layered around one central elevator shaft. So in effect the level design of System Shock 2 is like a sandwich. You have layers stacked on top of each other. And it's this kind of level design which encourages exploration and backtracking, and you have to find keys to unlock certain doors. Now, the problem that starts to arise with System Shock 2 is the fact that there are so many doors in this game. There are so many rooms, and Silent Hill 2 also suffers from this problem, that there are so many rooms, and it lacks, for me, System Shock 2 lacks the focus that Resident Evil Remake has. In Remake, every room has a purpose, every room can be unlocked and accessed, and also the fact that all the rooms in Remake look different from each other. For example, just visually, aesthetically, each room in the Remake, they look different from each other, and they look different compared to rooms adjacent to them, which is very, very important, because in games like System Shock 2, where there are so many rooms, so many different places to explore, this inevitably leads to frustration, because you may have to find a key and go across the entire level all the way to the other side of the map to unlock a certain door, and I feel the level design in Remake is a lot fairer than System Shock 2. There's a certain section in System Shock 2 where it's basically a connecting corridor between two sections of the map, and it's basically, it turns into a maze. It's not intentionally built as a maze, but you have beige walls, beige everything. It's just a completely beige corridor, and it's just very, very confusing trying to find your way out of this corridor. There are 2 or 3 doors that lead out of it, but you just get completely lost in this section of the game. In this short clip I'm showing you, you can see the walls, just aesthetically, they look all the same, and this caused me so much frustration going backwards and forwards, and in the end I had to use my mini-map to find my way out of this section, and I feel like this detracted from the horror of the situation. Now, System Shock 2 is a scary game. At times it is a terrifying experience, but it's when you go through sections in the game like this where you're taken out of the game and you have to look at your mini-map and follow the mini-map to get out of this beige corridor. It just detracted from the experience for me and really impacted on the horror of the situation and the horror of the game was presenting, really. There's a maze presented in Alan Wake, actually, and the game makes it very, very clear to you that, yes, the player, you are about to enter a maze. That's fair. It has this kind of fairness to it. It says that you are about to enter into a maze, and the maze will last a certain amount of time, and then you'll leave the maze. Unfortunately, this is not done. The maze-like effect in this beige corridor in System Shock 2 it's not designed to be a maze, but it is just a result of poor level design, in my opinion. I think for me, with level design in horror, is that I think it should be fair. In Remake, every room looks unique from the next room, and the problem with System Shock 2 is the fact it presents a world which is almost uniform in terms of its colour palette. It's either grey or it's a bit beige. Apart from the mall or garden sequences, the entire Von Braun looks exactly the same. So you're presented with a game which all the rooms look the same. And then you're presented with a game which has huge numbers of rooms in it as well to look through, and keys and doors to be unlocked are spaced miles apart from each other. So you've got these huge, unnecessary amounts of backtracking, and it gets very repetitive. And then my point is that it's this type of level design in System Shock 2 which creates frustration and irritation, and the second that occurs in a horror game is when the illusion is lost. I think another point I wanted to mention about level design in horror is the theme of constriction. Now, the level design in Resident Evil Remake, it's constricts the player. It forces the player to think, okay, there's a zombie in front of me, I've got 5 bullets left, what do I do? Do I attack the zombie? Do I run away from the zombie? Now, the level design here plays a key role in providing the player with these meaningful choices. Do I go forward? Do I go backward? Do I retreat? Do I fight? These kinds of things. And in comparison to games like Alan Wake or Fear, for example, with Alan Wake, you are presented in a woodland environment, you're presented in a forest environment, and unfortunately the enemies, the dark presence in this game, they can actually run faster than Alan Wake can. So unfortunately the game prevents the player from making meaningful choices in terms of combat, because the player is essentially forced to fight the dark presence and kill the dark presence and then move on, and so on and so on. I think the same problem occurs in the game Fear as well. It's a corridor shooter. There's really no point that the game presents an opportunity for the player to run away. It's quite obvious for the player that they have to move forward. And the same goes for Doom 3 as well. The game is basically saying to you, you have to move forward. The solution to this problem is moving forward. Whereas in Remake, the solution sometimes is running away. The solution is to go back through the door you came from and then go round a different way. The game is presenting you with the choice to either go forward or retreat, and I think that inherently provides more interesting gameplay than just going forwards. I know it sounds very simple, but you know, you're going forwards in Fear and Doom 3, and you go forwards in most games, but I think on a very simplistic level, Remake, through its level design, presents the opportunity to run away and retreat, which is a perfectly valid option and actually more interesting option. I think with the game Alan Wake, the game sort of presents the player with this feeling, this kind of illusion of freedom. It kind of gives off the impression that yes, you have this forest to run around in, you can run anywhere you like, and you can just go up this hill and down there and over here and do anything you like. But the thing is, the action within Alan Wake occurs within specific designated zones within this area of freedom. So in some ways you don't really have any freedom at all, actually, but the game very cleverly gives off the impression that you do have freedom. There are a number of sections within Alan Wake which definitely constrict the player. For example, in the mill section, or the mine, or on the bridge, or the cable car, or the garden maze. In these very brief sections of the game is really squashing the player, but like I said, these sections only last very temporarily, so this feeling of constriction isn't quite as strong in Alan Wake. I think another thing I want to say about this theme of constriction is that these horror games are not only trying to restrict the player's movements and the player's freedom, they're also trying to constrict the player's morale. In games like Doom 3 and Cry of Fear, they will often repeatedly show the player horrific, bloody scenes and bodies on the ground and horrible, awful scenes that just repeatedly, just relentlessly battering the player and stomping on the player and just suffocating the player with this awful, repeated imagery just all the time. For example, there's a scene in Cry of Fear where you're running through a forest late at night in pitch blackness. You have just a lantern to protect yourself with, and these hanging corpses just drop down from the trees, and it's just these hanging corpses hit you and they damage you, and someone with a chainsaw is chasing you from behind, and it's just horrific. This scene in Cry of Fear is absolutely heart-poundingly awful, and it's just these games, these great horror games, are just constantly, repeatedly just bashing you all the time. So in terms of constriction, it's not just the physical constriction of claustrophobic level design, it's your state of mind as well. The games are battering your morale and your feelings, and it's these games are just attacking you on an emotional level as well, and that's another part of the constriction with these games. I think for me, the reason why I believe the level design of Remake to be superior to other horror games is because the game presents the mansion as a jigsaw, and it's up to the player to piece by piece unlock the jigsaw with keys and unlocking puzzles, and I think this jigsaw-like design, this interlocking design, is infinitely more interesting than most level design in other horror games. A game I'm a big fan of is Alien Isolation, actually. It reminded me of Remake because you have to find different blowtorches to open different doors, and you kind of progress through the space station in a circular fashion, much like Resident Evil. I think a very important point I wanted to mention is the fact that circular level design in horror is vastly superior to linear level design. Now, the reason for this is because if you have a game world and you are going round and round and round in circles, like you do with Remake, like you do with Alien Isolation, it feels like the horror will never end. And I think this is a very profound feeling that the player can experience with circular level design. There's also this feeling with level design in horror that I feel great level design in horror should... the levels should feel like a hostile entity. Now, games like Alan Wake do this feeling very, very well. You feel like the forest is alive. You feel like the forest is out there to get you. And in the same way, the world of Alien Isolation, you've got transit cars running past, you've got elevator shafts collapsing, and it feels like the very world itself is trying to kill you. And also, Alan Wake does it with inanimate objects just floating in the air, and then they attack you. These kind of random objects just float in the air and attack you, and it feels like the inanimate world is out there to get you. And I think great horror games employ this strategy. Okay, a game I'd like to mention is Silent Hill 2, and the fact in this game there are literally dozens of doors in this game which are completely redundant. They seem to be placed there completely superficially. There are no keys to unlock these doors. They are just, redundant basically, and I feel that this is very lazy level design. I mean, in comparison with the Remake, almost every single door in Remake can be unlocked, apart from one door I can think of in the lab section. You can unlock every single door, and I feel this gives the game a lot more focus than Silent Hill 2. So I wanted to sum up why I believe the level design of Remake to be superior to other horror games, and it's mainly due to the fact of this feeling of circularity. The game has this kind of jigsaw-like design where pieces slot perfectly into each other, and all rooms are being used. There are no redundant rooms. Each room looks unique from the next room, and it's this feeling of the jigsaw level design which makes it vastly superior to most other types of level design I've seen in horror games. Okay, so that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to comment, rate and subscribe. You can tweet me at thehorrorofvg, or you can see my blog at thehorrorofvideogames.com. See you next time.